All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the D60 Discover DSO panel session. I'm Valerie Browning. I am the director of DARPA's Defense Sciences Office. In today's session, several of DSO's program managers, as well as myself, are going to try and give you some insight regarding DSO's mission, including how we support the broader agency mission. We're going to try and pique your scientific curiosity by giving you some descriptions of technical areas that we're considering for potential future investments. And we hope to excite and motivate you to engage our PMs in helping to shape and inform our future strategy investments by bringing us your innovative concepts and ideas. So, of course, we're all here to commemorate 60 years of DARPA innovation and to contemplate what the next 60 years might bring in terms of innovation. And in fact, DSO has been supporting the DARPA mission for nearly 40 years. We like to consider ourselves as DARPA's DARPA in the sense that our investments, our early investments, help to inform and shape the future investments across the agency and even more broadly throughout the DoD 3, 5, and 10 plus years in the future. So within the context of the DARPA mission to invest in pivotal technologies for national security, the DSO investments represent some of the earliest of those early pivotal investments. In order to ensure that our nation never again is surprised by the scientific innovation of our adversaries. DSO is one of 6 offices within DARPA, and we are unique in terms of our diversity in people and programs. We tend to be the most forward-looking office across the broadest landscape of technologies. And as I will discuss in more detail in the next slide, our investments are spread across broad thrust areas. And while our investments do represent a good fraction of the agency's fundamental research, we do invest from a mission-informed perspective. Our current portfolio is organized across the technical thrust areas that you see here. Because measurement of signals ranging from DC to daylight is ubiquitous across so many important DoD missions and applications, we have a limits of sensing and sensors thrust. And here we consider both practical and fundamental limits. It's important to understand the art of the possible, but we also need to ensure that we are investing technologies that ultimately can be delivered and deployed as a capability to the warfighter. Social behavioral science is critically important to many DoD applications, ranging from training and wargaming to mission planning, and presents a number of challenges in trying to leverage innovation out of social sciences for these DoD applications. Additionally, we're increasingly seeing that machines and robots are transitioning from being human tools to human collaborators, and we haven't yet quite figured out how to optimally plan for these missions that involve these heterogeneous teams. So for these reasons, and to address these challenges, we have a complex social systems thrust area. Because ultimately, the goal of DSO R&D is to ensure that U.S. warfighters have the most advanced technical capabilities. We are never again surprised by the scientific innovation of our adversaries. We have an anticipating surprise thrust. And in this thrust, the programs that we invest in tend to be nearer term and focused on either existing or emerging very specific national security threats. And they arise oftentimes because we do look across such a broad landscape of technologies that sometimes we will see some capability or new technology emerging in one domain that we see could apply in a completely different domain to address a particular challenge. Finally, because the increasingly complex, technologically sophisticated and dynamic military operational environments are presenting challenges in how we plan for future military missions ranging from materials to platforms to systems of systems, we have a cross-cutting thrust in frontiers, math, computation, and design. And here we're exploring novel computing architectures and substrates, new algorithms for decision and design, and new mathematical models to help us to more quickly explore broader design spaces, looking for new or better capabilities, and to make better decisions in real time. So here you see the faces and interest areas of DSO's current staff of program managers. I encourage you over the remaining time here at D60 to seek them out and talk to them and tell them about your interests. And I also encourage you after the conference to go to the DARPA website and look up, and you'll see a little bit more information about their interests and ways to actually reach out and communicate with them. So I'm going to, in a few minutes, talk about some recent DSO programs to give you sort of a flavor of the types of programs that we pursue and the challenges that we try to take on. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about a new activity that DSO has been exploring for accelerating our ability to engage with the R&D community. If you haven't already read our National Defense Strategy as articulated by Secretary Mattis, I highly encourage you to do so. Among several priorities that the strategy calls out include the need to harness and protect the national security innovation base and to deliver performance at the speed of relevance. DSO's disruptionary program is addressing these priorities. Periodically, throughout the year, our program managers will publish special notices under the disruptionary umbrella program, and these describe high-risk concepts and exploration-type opportunities with an acquisition strategy that's tailored to get from announcement posting to award in 90 days or less. And so we've already done 5 of these. We've kind of got our sea legs under us. We know how to do this now, and we've been very pleased with the results so far. So look for those opportunities to be continuously posted throughout the year. So now I'm going to talk about just a few of our recent programs, and you see some of these mapped here across the different thrust areas. So first, I'd like to tell you about the Sigma Plus program. This program is looking to develop a city-scale capability for continuous monitoring and early detection of the full spectrum of mass terror and mass destruction threats. This program is building on the success of our earlier Sigma program, which did develop and demonstrate city-scale monitoring of nuclear threats. Sigma was a highly successful program that is in the process of transitioning and being deployed by our government and allied partners. We've already started work on the sensor part of the Sigma Plus program, and we anticipate moving forward with the network backbone development in the next few months. Under the Systematizing Confidence in Open Research and Evidence program, or SCORE, we're looking to provide DoD consumers of social science research an automated tool that can quantify the degree to which a particular reported result is likely to be reproducible and replicable in future studies. This understanding is crucial to building predictive social behavioral science models for DoD applications. Under our Space, Environment, and Exploitation program, or C, we're looking to develop mathematical tools, algorithms, and sensor fusion concepts to enable space weather prediction with unprecedented spatial and temporal resolution. The space environment can significantly impact the readiness of many of our communication and navigation equipment, so understanding conditions in space is an important aspect of military mission planning. I'm now going to tell you about 2 agency-wide programs or activities that DSO helps facilitate. So one that I'm particularly excited to tell you about, because it's based on the success of the disruptioneering program that I just told you about, is the Artificial Intelligence Exploration Program. This program will enable DARPA to explore frontiers that advance the state of the art, and it's part of a broader agency strategy of AI investment that really will help ensure that the U.S. maintains a technological advantage in this critical area. So we've already had one topic posted under the AIE, and you can look for more topics to be coming in the very near future. And finally, I would like to tell you a little bit about our agency-wide Young Faculty Award program. Again, this program solicits topics from programs across the agency, and it seeks to recruit rising stars in junior research positions at academic and nonprofit institutions. Annually, DARPA releases a list of topic areas against which YFA proposals can be submitted. Those who are selected for award receive 2 years of funding up to $250K per year per award, and an opportunity for a third year of funding up to $500K. The YFA program is a wonderful opportunity for young and mid-career researchers to become familiar with the DARPA mission, and we look for many of our YFA awardees to become principal investigators and even program managers for future DARPA programs. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to our program managers, who will each spend some time talking about their interest areas. First, I'd like to introduce Major David Lewis, and he's going to share some of his thoughts on challenges of operating in the space environment, as well as possible frontiers at the limits of quantum technologies and new physical domains. On a personal note, he came to us early in 2018 from the Air Force Institute of Technology, and he likes to think of himself as the closest person you'll meet to a theoretical physicist in a military uniform. Then we'll hear from Ted Senator, who's going to discuss his interests in new AI technologies for enabling predictive and robust performance in unknown or uncertain environments. Ted is one of our newest, or maybe the newest, program manager. I think about 4 to 6 weeks he's been with DSO. It's actually his second tour at DARPA. He has worked in the past in developing artificial intelligence applications for a number of applications, including anti-money laundering, counterterrorism, and financial fraud detection. He also has the distinction of being a former Jeopardy champion who lost to Watson when it was under development. And then finally, we're going to hear from Adam Russell, who is going to talk about the complexities and challenges of social systems and implications for DoD applications in the human domain. Adam came to DSO in 2015. He was formerly a program manager in IARPA. He is an avid rugby fan, having played on the U.S. national team, and he's also a published poet. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to David.
All right, can everyone hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here. As Valerie said, consider myself a theoretical physicist, but of course, when you're in the Air Force, the closest they'll let you be to that is an applied physicist. So I love to talk about physics, and today there are 3 topic areas that are my top 3 interests right now that I'd like to talk about with the time that I have here. Space and plasma physics, quantum computing and quantum mechanics, and then finally some gravitation. So space, the final frontier. Right, so I would love to sit up here and talk about developing the next Enterprise D, but we're not there yet. However, space is right now a very strategic capability for us, correct? So I contend that everyone in this room is operating in space, whether directly 1 degree away, 2 degrees away, so on and so forth. If we all have a cell phone and we use that for PNT, precision navigation and timing, I don't know how I get around DC without Waze, right? But as we start thinking about the future, precision PNT, better comms, precision ISR, command control, so on and so forth, the future of space is going to become more operational and more tactical, right? We're already seeing that today with rapid space launch, for example, right? You have companies like SpaceX who are trying to make these reusable rockets so that we can put in, for example, low Earth orbit constellations, like our Blackjack program's trying to do. For those of you who saw the Mosaic Warfare plenary yesterday, the sort of space sensor layer, if you will, using space in that realm is going to be a part of that Mosaic Warfare, right? It's going to be some of that sensor suite. So what I then do is I put my hat on as a particular, potential future commander, correct? Where space is operational and space is tactical. So one of the things we're taught in the military when you're learning to be a commander is operational preparation of the battlefield. Part of that is understanding the weather. So what do we mean by the weather when we're talking about the space domain? And so my first interest is in the realm of near-Earth space environment prediction, where we have the thermosphere, the ionosphere, and the magnetosphere that can get in the way of some of those futuristic capabilities that we want to see with Mosaic Warfare, so on and so forth. So you can imagine maybe sometime in the future, like a STRATCOM, we'll have like a space tasking order, where we're actually operationally and tactically tasking our space assets to go do the mission. So we need to understand how that near-Earth environment is going to affect that precision, how it's going to affect that accuracy. And when you look across what we can do right now, we don't have that capability. The capability we have today almost completes the mission. When we look towards the future of what we're going to need in terms of predicting small-scale phenomena in the ionosphere, for example, sporadic E, also known as plasma clouds, right? On a 72-hour time frame, how do I know if that's going to get or interfere with my comms, for example, or interfere with my PNT? So what I'm interested in is going back and looking at the magnetohydrodynamics that describes the ionosphere, this charged fluid. And instead of sticking at the MHD level, actually include nonlinear effects, because those are what we know that produce sort of the small-scale phenomena. But of course, when you take these equations, go back to Boltzmann, for those of you taking statistical mechanics, and you look at those equations, you have to find a way to represent them with these nonlinearities so that they are computable, right? And then when you do that, you say, man, I'm really going to need some high-powered processing. And so I want to think about those technologies like GPUs and TPUs and machine learning that's going to help us take those dynamical equations of motion and then propagate them towards the future so I can actually give a capability to our space operators for the future. Now, beyond just being able to predict the dynamics and then propagate those dynamics, I also think about this environment somewhat, if you will, like for an Army commander. And what I mean by that is an Army commander likes to take advantage of the environment they're in. So plain example, if there's a ridge, maybe you do a flanking motion so you can take the high ground. So when I think about operating in the space domain, I think about what does it mean to exploit the environment that's up there. So for example, take the ionosphere, okay? It is globally surrounds the Earth. And just like if I take a pebble and throw it in a pond and I see these ripples, you can invert that idea and now think of the ionosphere as a pond. So anything that is on the Earth or in the air, if it's going to produce, for example, an acoustic wave, that acoustic energy is going to propagate to the ionosphere and it's going to ring it, it's going to perturb it. So all of a sudden I can think about my ionosphere as a global sensor. So thinking about those technologies that I would need, both from the transmitter and receiver aspect, from the algorithms to detect potential weak signals, I want to understand, can we use the ionosphere as a sensor? Because then that's going to enable us to, if you will, get more information about some of those denied areas that we're very interested in being able to tackle there. So I want to move on to my second interest area, quantum computing and quantum mechanics. So who all here has heard about quantum computing? Hopefully, okay, fantastic. How many years is it away? Right, so what my personal interest, so I come from a quantum mechanics background, I don't want to see quantum computing become the next cold fusion, where it's always 10 years away, or always 20 years away, or always 30 years away. So in order to do that, think about what we have today and find those difficult problems. So in the short term, what I am thinking about is prototyping quantum algorithms. So what do I mean by that? When you look at the IBMs and the Googles and the Rigettis of the world, they now have their circuit-based quantum chips. They call them NISQ-era chips, noisy intermediate scale quantum computers. And these chips have about 100 qubits on them, and they have enough coherence time and just enough error resistance to be what some of the experts call useful. Okay? And so we have this suite of hardware that hardware developers are working on. On the other side, you have the software developers who are developing these quantum algorithms in the sense of they imagine they have perfect qubits, it's completely scalable, and we're going to go ahead and be able to do a Shor's algorithm or an HHL. There is a wide gap between the hardware we have today and the algorithms developers and the way to develop algorithms. So what I am thinking about then is let's take what we have today, take some noisy algorithms, if you will, take some noisy quantum chips, and actually prototype and do the quantum systems engineering design, and literally try and run some of these prototypical algorithms and max out these quantum processors. Sort of harping back to what Secretary Griffin talks about in terms of let's prototype, let's go out and do the experiments, let's learn by doing, right? You know, going back to when we had space launch, you know, how many failures did we have before we finally got it? That's what I want to do with quantum computing. Let's prototype these algorithms, learn by doing, and failure's okay because then it'll point out where are the aspects where we need to actually invest in to get quantum algorithms working. Of course, that's the short term. I have questions about the long term. So when we talk about a qubit, a two-level system, and you want to have eventually in the future 1,000 qubits or 10,000 qubits, the question becomes, where is that limit between quantum mechanics and classical mechanics? Is it a line in the sand? Does it gradually get there? How does that actually work? When we think about scalable quantum computers, we're going to have error-resistant qubits, our logical qubits, and depending what papers you read, it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 qubits. Can we still use quantum mechanics to describe that? Furthermore, is there anything in the universe that's just limiting our ability to control these quantum systems? Right? They have to be extremely cold, but we know that the universe is not at absolute zero. Right? There's the heat bath, the microwave background, the 4K temperature of space. Is that actually going to get in the way of us running these scalable quantum computers? So I also am thinking about what are the fundamental limits of quantum computing to make sure that this is an area that we really want to invest in. Is it actually possible or impossible? Finally, I'll end up with one of my favorite topics, gravitation. So in this realm, I think about how can we unlock new modes of communication. So going back to sort of our Hallmeyer questions, Hallmeyer question number 2, what's new? One of the most exciting things that, in physics that I'll contend in the past couple of years was the discovery of gravitational waves, right? They're no longer just theorized, we actually observe them with our LIGO. So that got me thinking, all right, let's go back and rethink about gravitational communication, right? So you have a transmitter, you have your receiver, and you have your signal. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with the way that we found these gravitational waves is that there are a lot of advancements in numerical relativity. So you can take Einstein's equation, represent them so that they're computable, and then you realize, oh, I need some high-powered computers, right? And so you put 2 black holes in, you spin them up, you do the calculation, you add some noise on top of that, propagate it, and you actually use machine learning to then take all the signals that our observatories are looking at and try and pattern match them, and eventually, you get a 5 sigma, 6 sigma discovery. So now I'm thinking about from the signal aspect, can we take those newest developments in numerical relativity and run it backwards? right? So say if I want an amplitude modulated gravitational wave or frequency modulated gravitational wave, what type of mass configuration would I need to start thinking about that? And also, do the current aspects of wave phenomena that we know, for example, the principle of superposition, that still hold for these quadrupole gravitational waves? Now, I'm not up here saying I want to create black holes, but I want to go ahead and I want to set the stage for thinking about what type of mass configurations we potentially need. And then just to finish up, along with gravitational waves, we also have gravitational fields. Just being able to measure those gravitational fields with the latest involvement, latest advances in NEMS and MEMS, so on and so forth, because now you can start thinking about maybe using these in low G environments. So think about, once again, the idea space is going to become tactical. If I could put some sort of gradiometer on them, and if another mass comes near, for example, my satellite, then that gives me situational awareness in which maybe I can make a decision based off of that instead of having to put cameras or other sensors along my satellite. So I think my time's up. I have lots more ideas and things I'd love to talk about, so come find me afterwards. And thank you very much. Next we'll have Ted Senator.
Thank you. How many of you who ever dealt with a new situation? Anybody? Never? How many of you have ever had the experience of realizing that what you believed about a situation or about the world wasn't true or needed to be changed, or that you were misled somehow? Anyone? So you all knew everything in advance? Or, nah, that's the alternative. So how did you figure out what to do when that happened? Did you wait for somebody to tell you that things were different and you ought to behave differently? Did you ask for help? Did you think about how you dealt with similar situations in the past? Did you, either in real life or perhaps how you thought about how you might deal with a fictional situation? Did you think about how others dealt with it? If you did any of these things, did they work? Did they satisfy the objectives you might have had when you thought about it afterwards? Or did you later have the experience of saying, I wish I had done something differently? How many people had that happen to them? So we're going to be using in DoD, as you've heard, AI a lot more. And our AI systems today, and as you heard in the panel discussion and the plenary yesterday afternoon, can't deal with new situations. They're very good at taking advantage of patterns or things that repeat frequently in the world. We've made some progress on anomaly detection, on finding unusual activity or unusual things in data when we know what the task is, or we have an idea of what type of potentially interesting behavior might be indicated by anomalies or things that don't happen often, or more important, a better definition of anomaly is things that come from a distinct generative process than what most of the data comes from. But what we are not good at is dealing with what's called the open world, with the unknown unknowns. And that's where AI, I think, is going to need some fundamental new advances for us to really take advantage of it in military and DoD and, frankly, many other applications. Because if you're doing the type of things that we can imagine in the Defense Department, we don't have the opportunity to keep trying multiple times. When our military goes out into the field in a new situation, and every situation is new and has aspects that weren't anticipated, they've got to get it right, and they've got to get it right the first time, because the alternative is a major headline in lots of publications, or one of your favorite news network, or maybe it's your anti-favorite news network, that says the US screwed up big time. And it was screwed up because it relied on some artificial intelligence system, and we don't want that to happen. So what I'm interested in doing is pushing the limits of artificial intelligence to be able to deal with these issues that arise in an open world. That's where I think we require a lot of new ideas and a lot of new fundamental technical advances in order to enable applications way beyond the type of things that are being developed today. So as you heard from Valerie, I'm Ted Senator. I'm the newest program manager in DSO. But it's my second time at DARPA. I had 6 years previously, so maybe that makes me the oldest PM too. I haven't asked. And I want us to be able to create the basic ideas, the basic science principles and advances in AI that will allow us to recognize and then to act appropriately, if not ideally, in novel situations. This is very different from the publicized applications that we've heard about. I mean, we all see the headlines about AlphaGo. We see the headlines, years ago about Deep Blue, Watson's winning on Jeopardy, and even the Libratus poker player. Because what we're trying to do, even in some of those cases, there's complete information about the game. You know the rules, you know the positions of both opponents. In poker, it's a partial information game. In poker, there's strategy involved, but you know the rules. The rules don't change. By the way, when I lost to Watson, it was as it was being developed, and they had me play not the game I won when I was on TV, but the game I lost, and I lost to Watson by more than I lost to the human opponents. But it was 10 years later, and I was much slower on the buzzer, and a large part of Jeopardy is the buzzer. So that gets to the AI issue of embodiment, I think, that Watson didn't deal with. So while all these applications that I've mentioned have huge search spaces, sometimes too larger than the number of atoms in the universe, impossible to traverse completely. They may even have unknown entities, though they might have, you don't know how many of a particular type. You may have unknown relationships, but the types of the entities and relationships are assumed known. And most important, what's assumed invariant, even if not known, are the rules of the game. And when you're dealing with these unknown situations, you may not know the rules of the game. You may not even know that you don't know them. So imagine you're playing poker with 4 or 5 of your friends, and all of a sudden, sevens are wild, and nobody knows. Nobody's told. It just sort of magically happens because the dealer or whoever somehow makes that change. How would you recognize as you're playing that something different is going on, and then know that you need to update your strategies and you need to update your models of what the other players are doing for that situation? Or imagine you're playing chess, and all of a sudden, knights were allowed to move the same way bishops could, or the size of the board changed, or anything else that type of change you could possibly imagine. Or what if Watson were asked a question about something far outside its training set? If it were given a question that had nothing to do with any of the documents that it had read. It's fairly open-ended, but it's still bounded by the sets of things that it's been trained on. And one of the reasons that Watson hasn't been as deployed as widely as IBM stockholders might have hoped is because it requires extensive training in order to be applied to any particular domain, let alone to the general domains and tricks that you'd find on Jeopardy. So how would you know if you were doing this, or how would your AI system behave? It might do something embarrassing. It might just say, well, something weird is going on, I'm going to stop. But that, if you're playing poker and you just drop out of the game, that's probably not going to endear you to your friends. If you're Watson and you just stop responding, that's not going to look very good either. And someone gave me an example this morning. If you just, what happens when the driverless car gets confused? Well, it's stopping on the freeway so it can figure out what's going on is not going to be an effective strategy. It'll lead to a chain reaction of rear-end collisions, which is not a good thing. So we need the AIs to be able to recognize that something different is going on, to be able to identify what the differences are, to be able to repair or update their models of the world, and then to figure out, using those newer models of the world, how to act appropriately. And it has to be able to do all those 4 things in order to be really useful in supporting applications in these novel situations. And that's the type of area I'd like to go forward in, where I'd like to see some new ideas. So I think there's a number of ways we might do that. We've heard a lot about DARPA's third wave in AI and the use of context. I think that's essential, but I don't think it's sufficient. I think we need contextual information about the current situation, but we also need broader understanding of more abstract things, such as agents and motivations. We need richer representations. that can account for motivations and that can account for the idea that alternative interpretations of the current state might exist. We need to be able to determine when an apparent anomaly or inconsistency means that our current interpretation is wrong, or more challenging, suggests the alternative interpretation of the current situation that's not contraindicated by the observations or facts or the context. We need to incorporate the ability that people have to say something's just not right. You know, when I was working on stock market fraud, we talked about the smell test. Something just doesn't seem right here. And people have this innate ability. We don't quite know why. It's not well developed enough. We still fall victim to phishing attacks. But we do have some ability to do that. I don't know how we learn that over time, but I do know that I don't believe that we've incorporated that sense into any of our AI systems. We need to know when something is truly new, or when it's really just something different from what we think is going on now, but is something that we have seen before. I talked about we need to update things. We need to use background knowledge. We need the ability to be able to fall back to weaker methods if some more specialized method for a particular situation suddenly is inapplicable. Maybe we need to use general principles or some domain knowledge. How else are we going to act appropriately with the unknown unknowns? So we need to be able to, I think, be inspired by how people deal with unknown and novel situations, how people recognize that something's different or something's changed, and use those techniques to come up with new ways of developing AIs. And one of the other challenges we're going to have in doing this is quantifying what we mean by the degree of change. I think it's very important, given the way with the Heilmeier criteria and how we look at programs at DARPA, that we not just say, well, something's different and look how I dealt with it, but we have to be able to characterize degrees and types of differences so we can map out the space of changes and unexpected events and unknown events, and then say, very carefully characterize any technique that we develop so that any claims we make are well-founded and well-bounded and well understood where they really work and where they don't, because otherwise we can end up with lots of hype instead of good science, and that's not something we want to do. So I welcome lots of new ideas from everybody in the room and anyone else who's going to help us formulate this into a new research area and lead to a new generation of AI techniques. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Adam. I've never played rugby, but he has.
My
brother did once.
Once. Thanks, Ted. Valerie, I was going to thank you for that introduction as well, but I feel somehow I've been outed. I thought we signed an NDA there. So the other thing Watson doesn't do is get a head cold, so I apologize in advance. If you can't understand me, that's probably for the better. So don't worry. I've been at DSO for 3 years. And I'm looking at this now and thinking as a theoretical physicist, a computer scientist, and a social-cultural anthropologist wandering onto a panel. And it's not a joke, I think. So I am used to introducing myself as a bit of an oddity, a socio-cultural anthropologist, although recently we have this podcast called Voices from DARPA. And for some reason I was featured on one, so now I can introduce myself as the DARPA anthropologist. I need to figure out how to get like thunderclap or something. So I'm here to try to answer one question, in part by making one bold but plausibly sustainable assertion. The first question is, why is there an anthropologist at DARPA? And the assertion that I would like to follow up quickly with is, it is not because DARPA is interested in the soft sciences. It is because DARPA is interested in the hardest science. We heard a lot about people there, and I think people are actually the hardest sciences. Now I'll try to plausibly maintain that as I give you a talk. But that's sort of where I sit right now in the complex social systems area. And when we're talking about complex social systems, I think actually one of there's a term DoD uses called the human domain. And that's the combination of the social, cultural, physical, environmental, informational, psychological variables that affect ultimately the end game being sort of human behavior. when you're in the maritime domain, it can be pretty clear. When you're in the space domain, I think it's pretty clear. Cyber domain is a little harder, but we're getting there. How do you know if you're actually in the human domain? Well, let's say you want to design an effective and adaptive deterrent strategy. Let's say you're interested in enhancing the resilience and performance of small teams and units, where those small teams and units increasingly are hybrids of humans and machines, where we expect those machines, we need those machines to no longer just be tools, but actually be teammates. Let's say you're interested in designing or evolving systems that demonstrate the characters and qualities you want: innovation, cohesion, trust, or systems that are able to resist the qualities you don't want: distrust, misinformation, corruption. Let's say you're interested in accelerating reconstruction or stability operations after a man-made or natural disaster. If you're interested in those things, congratulations, you're in the human domain. But if you think about it from that perspective, of course, human domain speaks to pretty much every important national and international challenge that we face, I think, at this point. And so I contend that if we can begin to make capabilities and technologies for the human domain, I'm really excited particularly about the next 60 years of DARPA's investments and its ability to positively impact the world. So that's great. Why aren't we doing it now? Well, here's why I'll try to convey to you as simply as possible why I think this is the hardest science. And I'm not alone, by the way. I will reference periodically a couple of Nobel-winning physicists who tend to agree with me in case you want real science. Number one, and here are 4 things I'm going to give you, and they're important because if you come to me with a solution, or DARPA with a solution that you think enables the capability in the human domain, it should touch at least on all 4 of these things. Otherwise, I won't believe you're actually doing people. Number 1, all agents in complex social systems are strategic all the time. You know who you are. Humans are goal-directed, and they're constantly sort of changing what they're trying to do. And the challenge this provides is we can no longer, it's difficult to aggregate all the agents into a single representative agent because of these strategies that are shifting or changing and are adapting. So if you want to have a very short conversation with me, come up and let's talk about the brain. Let's talk about the human. Let's talk about the insurgent, or even the warfighter. Because I don't know those things. Those are not real things, and are not going to advance as I think. So that's the first problem. Second problem, effects become causes. And this may not be unique to the social systems per se, except that the effects I'm talking about in this case are collective fictions. So 60 years ago, some people changed their behavior and created a collective fiction that we now call DARPA. That was the effect of their behavior. But now, as far as I know, very few, if any, of those original people are here today. But there are thousands of people here because of that collective fiction. That effect has now become a cause. And so that challenges our ability to bring simplifying assumptions about linear causal relationships. Number 3, the rules change. As Ted was mentioning, even if you know what the game is, the rules will change because humans co-evolve with their systems. I think about, for example, the fact that the iPhone didn't exist essentially 10 years ago, and now there's projected to be 3 billion at 2020. Is the Gutenberg press really a good analogy for that? Is there any kind of analogy for that? And the challenge is that we have this tendency to reason by analogy, but history is only so useful if, in fact, the rules change. So I would take an example. Sorry, guys, I stumbled up on my part. The rules change, right? Got that? Oh, so because history isn't that available, we need to, I think, really sort of imagine how we talk about things like the information environment and cognition. Our assumption is that human cognition is sort of this static evolutionary thing, and now we're suddenly in this new information environment. But that's not true. How we think is affected by what we think about, who we think about it with, and the tools we use. That's number 3. Number 4, I'm pretty sure I can remember this one. The reasons for playing the game change. The game you think you're playing depends on who you think you are and who you think you're playing against. And that is a function of social identity. And to date, no other system has had to include something like social identity into it. We've never found a Marxist chimpanzee. But in human systems, ostensibly neutral observers about the teleological development of history come up with a theory that then changes everything because people identify with that. That's a real problem that, as far as I know, physicists and engineers don't have to deal with. And maybe I'm a little envious, if you can't tell. So what do we do about this? I mean, right now what we do, I say, is we struggle. We struggle cognitively because it's really hard to think about this kind of complexity. So we do actually use simplifying assumptions about linear causal relationship. We struggle methodologically because it's really hard to measure these kinds of systems. So we do aggregate agents. We struggle interpretively. So we actually do end up reasoning by analogy. Is Afghanistan Vietnam? We do that because it's really hard to do this kind of work in a complex social system. All right, maybe that's intractable. What does DARPA do when it meets an intractable problem? Well, historically, oftentimes it's looked at it and said, is there actually a different problem? And so where I sit right now in DSO, I've been investing in technologies to try to help social science sort of tackle some of these things. But I think now, here's how I'd like to rephrase it. I think the problem is not one of getting social science to use modern technologies. The problem, in part, is how do we turn social science into a technology to actually solve other problems? Social science is a technology. I'm not sure what that means either. I'm not sure what that would look like. But DARPA's invested in areas before where we weren't really sure what the technology was going to look like. We just kind of knew where we wanted to go. So that sounds like a DARPA area to go. But there's a critical feature of DARPA programs, and this is where I am going to throw myself upon both the mercy of the court and the appeal of the wisdom of the crowds. We need good problems to stimulate technologies. What I mean by problems is problems that are clearly hard, clearly important, but also measurable. And this is really a challenge in complex social systems. How do you know whether your technology is actually solving the problem? So I would say, please, take advantage of the DARPA anthropologist. I'm holding the door open right now for the hardest science at DARPA. And come to me, please, with problems. Not necessarily solutions right away, but problems that we can use to stimulate what I think will be these technologies in the next 60 years. Technologies that will help us not just understand, but ideally thrive in the complexity of the human domain. Thank you.
All right, at this point, we are going to bring some questions to your attention from the audience. And some of these are directed to specific people, and others are more general. So the first question for Ted. How is what you're describing different from the AI complete problem? How is it different from transfer learning?
So, we had a program, and I was involved with in transfer learning a number of years ago. Transfer learning is learning in one domain because you don't have the data to do learning in another domain. But you typically know what the different tasks are. You know what the source domain and the target domain are. The rules don't change. You may not know what they are, but you do know you have to figure them out. So general game playing was a technology that was developed and begun under that program, where you might be playing, be presented with a set of rules and said, okay, go play this game. And you had to perform well the first time. But you knew what the rules were, and you knew it was different from other games that you've tried. So that's how it's different from transfer learning. Transfer learning also is more unidirectional. You have a source and a target domain. With respect to AI complete, if I knew everything about everything, my head would explode, but it would, that's impossible, I think, or it's certainly way beyond anything that I can imagine. So we still need to be able to figure out a way to bound things, to be able to go stepwise forward from the domain to look for what's unexpected, what's novel, what might be going on, without necessarily being able to have a complete explanation. So if I'm thinking in the context of an autonomous vehicle, for example, you might have to deal with, maybe an unexpected thing would be a bridge in front collapses on the highway. But you probably wouldn't have to deal with the interpretation of an alien spaceship lands, or your car is abducted to another planet all of a sudden, or something ridiculous like that. So I think there are degrees of reasonableness with which one can generalize without having to go to sort of knowing everything about everything.
Major Lewis, how does being in the military influence what R&D you explore in an organization like DSO?
Yeah, so I think I might be one of the first officers in DSO in a long time. think so. So I sit in a very unique position, especially in the sense, my last deployment was in Iraq and Syria, and I was with the Joint Special Operations Command. And so I was a operations officer, a J3, and what was really neat about that assignment is I got to see how, the actual special forces use the technology, whether they use the technology the way it was intended, or whether they use the technology in ways that was not intended. So actually being able to see how the operators use technology vastly influences the way I go about what technologies I want to develop, and in particularly how to develop them. Because I can think about that is a fantastic idea, fantastic technology, but no operator is going to use it. This is how an operator might use it. So it's very nice being sort of far left of the acquisition cycle as a physicist, and also having experience with the operators to get in the very beginning. This is the direction we need to push to make it transferable, to make it useful.
Adam. DARPA has a history of fomenting new research communities in part by asking new questions or framing old problems in new ways. What kind of new community do you see being created or needing to be created to better handle complex social systems?
More better. I think, so complex social systems, one of the challenges that we face is it's where essentially deductive and inductive methods go to die because of that complexity. And so I think, I would actually almost focus on the idea that we need more abductive methods. We can have a long discussion about what that actually means, except that I take that almost from a design perspective, where to get after these kinds of things, where you can't aggregate agents, the rules change, you need to sort of constantly conjecture. You have to constantly sort of prototype. You constantly have to test and reevaluate, and you've got to feed that back in. And I use the term design cycle with obviously some caution, because a lot of people aren't entirely certain what that means, even if they're in the design cycle. But my sense is that's true. And if you look at those capabilities that I think we're going to need, I think we're looking at everything from mathematical formalists who can actually help sort of take what are oftentimes verbal theoretical models or theories in human social science and turn them into something that's testable. We need evolutionary biologists. We certainly need data scientists. We need modeling and simulation. Yes, we need anthropologists. But I think that's part of the challenge is I'm not sure what that actual community looks like. And I think if we get this problem right or get these problems right, that community will be the one that solves that problem most effectively.
So I think this one is actually targeted to you as well, Adam, but I may comment on it before I turn it over to you. It says, how will social systems projects play in the go, no-go culture at DARPA? So what I'd like to comment on is this term of go, no-go culture. So how DARPA manages and makes investment decisions over the years reflects the philosophy of the management. And there was a period of time in DARPA's history where everybody knew what go, no-go meant. And, but the reality is that DARPA has always invested with a strategy that demanded that we put together a program plan that has definable and measurable progress points. And that hasn't changed today, even though you won't hear us talk about go, no-go metrics today. We still ask for milestones and where we can define them, metrics, quantifiable metrics, because DARPA, while building the wall of science and very fundamental research is critical to national security, we have billions of dollars being invested at NSF and elsewhere in the DoD to do that. What we need to do with our fundamental research investments at DARPA, and particularly within DSO, is we need to mine those investments, taking a mission-informed perspective, understanding where the innovation might be, and pushing it towards a vision for new capability. So I'll pass this on to Adam with the caveat that we don't use the term go, no-go in today's DARPA, but we still look for program plans, and we seek from proposers a plan that includes milestones, ways of measuring progress. So I think the real question is, in a social systems project, how do you measure progress?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie, for clarifying on that, because I think that's right. Now, to be clear, having been outside of DARPA as a social scientist, I'm sympathetic to some of the concerns that the community might have of, this is really hard stuff. How are you going to bring this sort of quantitative metrics to bear? I'm less concerned about that, though, and less sympathetic than I am to my bigger concern, which is we don't want to fail. Social scientists don't want to be wrong. And DARPA is a sometimes treat, in all honesty. So I think DARPA, you have to be willing to take a risk, and that means you may have to be wrong. And we're going to ask you to be wrong. I have performers on my other programs who I gloriously promote as having been wrong. But I know they're wrong, they know they're wrong, and we've advanced knowledge. As opposed to the shuffle dance in some cases where the incentives, I get it, are sometimes a little poorly aligned, the cultures can be different. But we can set ourselves up to never be wrong, and therefore actually not get anywhere. So I would actually say we should embrace, while perhaps not the go, no-go, that if you are interested in complex social systems, DARPA can play an enormously important role in this area. Because we will pay you to be wrong. I mean, I get to fail, and I've done my job. Take that, Dad. I mean, it's not comfortable, though. It's countercultural, and we see this ourselves. But please come and have a run at it, because I do believe, with programs like SCORE and other winds of change are coming, I do believe that being rigorous but wrong will one day be more rewarded than being fuzzy but not sort of wrong. And the national security realm needs that. Needs people to step up and be willing to be wrong.
Thank you. So, David, could you comment on good versus bad qubits? Are 100 qubits for real today?
Right. So when you look in the press, you probably see we now have 64 qubits, 92 qubits, 100 qubits, so on and so forth. The number of qubits in a particular quantum chip is not the number that you should be concerned about. We kind of think back to classical computers where we think of maybe megahertz to gigahertz, more RAM, higher numbers. With a quantum chip, you need to be concerned about its coherence time. What we mean by coherence time, that's how long can you maintain the system so that it still acts quantum mechanical, if you will. You still have superposition, you still have entanglement. That coherence time is driven by noise. So one of the things I like to joke about is if you're near a quantum computer, a quantum chip, don't sneeze, because you're adding energy to the system and you're going to break down the coherence time. The other thing, and so the coherence numbers usually aren't reported in the press. Another number that's usually not reported is the error rate of your qubit. So if we want to have these scalable quantum computers, we need the qubit operations, the quantum equivalent of or, and, but, so on and so forth, to be 99.99999. Just keep adding 9% accurate. Today we might be around 2 to 3 nines, depending which researchers you talk to and how can you verify that. So sort of the 3 things you need to think about for a quantum computer is, yes, how many qubits does it have? How long is the coherence time of the quantum system, and how error resistant or how error resistant your qubits are.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe 2 more. Hopefully this will be a quick one here. Ted, when can we expect causal models from AI, especially for human engineered systems like manufacturing?
That's not something I've thought about in terms of a timeline. I think there are causal models that are being researched by a number of people in different areas. I really don't know much about manufacturing, so I can't answer that part other than to say causal models for physical systems are a lot easier than causal models for human or social systems. So I think that's perhaps a good area to look into.
So one last question for all 3 of you. And this is a forward-looking question. So based on DSO's current and near-term investment portfolio, What big wins do you think we will be talking about at DARPA's 75th anniversary?
Ooh, I guess am I up first?
If you want.
Big wins. So I strongly believe right now that in this idea of prototyping quantum algorithms, learning by doing, and then being able to focus on the investments to actually make these work. Now, do I think we'll have scalable quantum computers in 15 years? Oh, I cross my fingers and I hope so. We still have some of those fundamental issues that we have to talk about, but I have a good feeling with the energy in this community. If we can get the disparate players to work together, the hardware folks, the algorithm designers, and the mathematicians, which is what I want to try and do, if we get them talking and think in a systems engineering fashion about how we put together an end-to-end quantum computer, quantum calculation, I think we could start making strides there. Hopefully we can simulate some of the QFT, the quantum field theories I know about that we can't do with classical computers. But that's kind of maybe my hope. I really would like to talk about that in 15 years.
Well, for me, the biggest win of what I would be talking about in 15 years is just the fact that I'll be able to be here talking about something in 15 years. And I hope that that will be the case. But I think another win is things that we don't talk about. So a lot of technology succeeds when it becomes hidden. So when it becomes just something we do without thinking about something that we have to call out as special or something that's embedded in the fabric of system solutions. So I think a big win would be if we're not talking about initiatives or what the hard problems in AI are, but if we've made enough advances that it just becomes another thing in our toolbox that the system designers can take advantage of. And if that's the case, then I think we've had a big win in 15 years.
We will finally be able to put metal in the microwave. Right? Okay. So where you sit is where you stand, obviously. I'm most excited, perhaps, from being the social scientist. At Valerie, frankly, the DSO brave investment in areas like complex social systems with the drive to discover what I think are going to be fundamental limitations on things that we can do and can't do. And I think that's going to be really important for designing new systems that get us to solve really hard problems. I'm particularly excited about the idea of social technologies for collective intelligence. And perhaps if I would be allowed to sort of really fantasize, perhaps more we realize that we can solve problems better, faster, with more people. Maybe we can include more people and there's less reason to fight.
Very good. Well, would you all please join me in thanking our program managers for sharing their thoughts today? We have just a couple minutes left, and one thing that I wanted to point out for you is that we have another DSO discussion panel on Friday at 8 a.m., bright and early. But the incentive for you to try and come is that you're going to see 3 other DSO PMs, and you get to hear the deputy director describe DSO instead of mine. So hopefully they're not too different, but you will get a chance to meet 3 other PMs and hear about their areas of interest. So please, again, really the main purpose of this was to sort of let you see a little bit about what we're thinking about DSO, but mostly we'd now like to be in receive mode and hear about your ideas and have you reach out, engage with our PMs, to hear at the conference, but follow up afterwards as well. Thank you very much for your attention.